property distribution must be, wait, I'm gonna pause. I just got a notification from Zoom. I'm just gonna exit out because it's obscuring my Word doc 406, starting at secure ourselves. Secure ourselves against coercive interference. Property distribution must be defined and enforced by the state. Now, is that in the state of nature, everyone's all equal arbiter of justice that makes rights violations possible result in still through conclusive possess of rights. The object right rather than subjective right does not place that on other people in the court of legitimity. Only individuals who the interpretation of justice as long as doing the state of nature, the person has a right to enforce their own interpretation of justice, which means that by placing the person under no duties but did not correspond with the person, so the authority over someone else's refuse to recognize the person under penalty equally free being abused with violence every time the person's interpretation of justice is they cannot possibly secure a secure face of freedom. Justice remains a mechanism, and under V1 is after one or three, it's enactedly infinite. So I can't check back. Drop the beta, so 1 or 2 short to 1 theory and substance. No RVR or 2 in our panel. Sit down for 6 minutes. My theory to tours by the two competing interests. If you want to of trying to flesh out proper kind of competing interpretation. Choose interpretation, evaluate the framework through the plaintext. They can still contest the framework, but that just means a reason dropped it, not me. A, the negative should get offense for the advocacy. The F, the only reliable stasis point argumentation. And the limits. If you think that the negative, you can go to your offense room kills Afghan strategy. The advantage. The space sector is trying to use privatization, now driving about losing technology, creating cascading collisions, but now trying global sectors being progressing, steady situation change with private entrepreneurs, investment state challenging, pay sexually origin for collector, establish privatization, private sector, skyrocket, weakness of new development, urbanization, reduction of prices, state objects in the orbit of proposed by cascading collisions, and becoming more severe privatization, excellency, increase the debris, lack of related spikes, as the models spread out 20 commercial relations where to become private companies, now carry out independent projects, constraining constellations, plans to go 12, that's abilities to 42, that's abilities to grow with the orbital object, compare with debris without, and with constellations in private companies, no institution has enough power to coordinate the orbit, no rules required for first come first serve, and fragmentation leads to speed degree laws of physics speed. No, the speed is maybe 10 times faster than bullet. Hypervelocity collisions travel through each other faster than the shock waves of each other. Fragment of physics according to laws of orbital motion collision involve a lot of energy. Pieces are falling extremely high speeds. There's no air to slow the pieces down. Go to the Farley evidence. The debris triggers miscalculated war. That's Farley 22. Debris from Earth to make orbits risky attacks on nuclear satellites. Bridges that go to situations. Not the connective issue. The transition countries cannot be detected. It's one closing satellites for ICBM attacks and for retaliation. Satellites spread by compensated expansion, complicated war confusion, misrepresentation, prelude nuclear attack and preempt skip. The mechanism no limited wars. Extinction. Warmer 19 nuclear nations of 50,000 nuclear weapons. Program 1 plasma trigger the EMP forms are fireball, raining the fall of alien scale to VR storm, blast and radiation, firestorms with debris, heat, or destability, just with the common causing drought, which are family catastrophic emphasis in the disease due to intense UV with destruction of ozone. Cut the card at destruction of ozone. Didn't read Sampson and McDonald on the advantage.
Oh, wait, sorry, can you repeat what you just said? I just didn't hear you.
Yeah, didn't read Sampson and McDonald on the advantage. And then I cut no limiting nuclear wars, the Weber evidence at UV with destruction of ozone.
Okay, cool. You good for cross?
Yeah.
Okay, why is looking at international law good?
What does that mean?
Oh, like, yeah, why? Your offense is based off of aligning with international law. Why is that good?
Well, we just say there's a promise and private entities are breaking that promise. We don't claim a theory of is international law good or not, but when you compel to a promise, you shouldn't break that promise.
Okay, so like every promise matters.
I don't know what every promise matters entails.
How do we know that the promise of international law is a good idea? Is it just like any promise we made is
that's just consequentialist. If you're just asking me to say why is international law good, I'm not going to defend international law as good. Like I'm just defending promise breaking as bad. That's simply what I'll defend.
Okay, what is the state of nature?
Yeah, the Stilts 2 and 3 evidence cause the state of nature. It's a question when our private acts outside of the state, i.e. when we don't have a governing omnilateral will to suppose us, i.e. what state, well, there's no one that governs that appropriate space and it's just private entities.
Okay, why is the state of nature bad?
The state of nature is bad because it's a question that there's no unilateral will to sort of govern and arbitrate what is justice. The Still 3 evidence articulates it makes it impossible to resolve rights violations. That's a bad thing because otherwise we cannot decide what is morally just or right because everyone has their own conception of
what does it mean for our ethics to be universalizable?
Yeah, you would say that all ethics must be, like, we would have maxims, and to decide whether maxims are morally just or not, we would go through a question of, are they universal maxims, i.e. can they apply to everyone without willing to contradiction?
Can you explain, or can you give some examples of things that would, like, violate the categorical imperative?
Yeah, one is sort of breaking a promise, coercing somebody, taxation, stealing something. Like, I think those are multiple examples.
Okay, that makes sense. Is there any instances in which, okay, so like if a poor Black person needs to steal food to provide for their family, why would Kant say that's bad?
Well, we would say stealing is bad.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. So stealing every instance is bad. Okay, can you explain?
Yeah, I'm just going to defend it.
Can you use the Corona 15 card?
Just explain it?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. It's just the Corona evidence articulates why Kant considers colonial colonialism, settler colonialism is illegitimate. There's
Yeah,
three
sure. It
warrants.
doesn't say settler colonialism. It just says colonialism. So I don't understand where you're getting that extrapolation from.
I think sort of the concept of structural colonialism, proven by the one you read against me last time, it relays on some question of is colonialism and how does ideal theory relate to sort of natives and the settler relationship. Obviously, Kant decrees that relationship illegitimate because those relationships were brought on by coercion, taking property, which we all consider illegitimate. Which I think, even if there's a difference in one word, it definitely applies.
Do governments have Kantian property rights?
Do governments right now have Kantian property rights?
Native governments have Kantian property rights.
You keep cutting out before governments. Can you say that?
Yeah.
You said, do you something governments? I couldn't hear the something.
Do native governments have Kantian property rights?
All governments under our world would have an omnilateral will that imposes Kant.
Okay, that's fine. I'll start properly quickly. Is anything exempt in the one I see? There's like a bunch of random numbers.
Plain text. It's just all res.
I took 6 seconds. I'll send the doc after I type that in chat. It's 1, then case. The order on the case page is going to be some like top level arguments, then the underview, and then the framework proper. I'm also going to answer some of the underview arguments, and then like the interpretation about evaluating the plan through the plan text will be done on the K page. It'll make sense, or not. Hopefully, it'll make sense. Okay. Let me know.
I got the email.
I would just like an order of pages.
Pages, okay. K page. If you want to throw like the K framework page on a separate page, then that. And then the like some top level framing stuff for the case page, the underview on the case page, the framework proper on the case page, and then the contention of 5 times.
Okay, so where's like what you just said, like top level stuff?
Like probably just like K page, F framework page, and then the contention page.
Okay. Off framework contention.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just do the underview. Actually, I'll just do the underview for framework, so it's not confusing.
When are you doing the underview?
I'll just do off underview framework contention.
Okay. Off underview framework contention.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good.
Are all the other judges informed? Cool. Settlerism is an everyday process shaped by effective investments in institutions that claim jurisdiction over land and Corruption 13. Settlerism rise and rise of the law and the variation of such as access indigenous territories on genera and conditions of push into practical conscious and limits of specific economic and political social subsystems as a simple experience in common city to access to local alternative and custodian non-native such as claiming a natural threat to indigenous places that have non-native music over local laws not available to specific very logical relation to settler governments sociality person and drugs and gardens and limitation organizing personal neighbors against the settler colonial society and ideal theories of formal abstraction away from the material violence of settler colonial and their view from nowhere is not only useless but actively props of settlers and nickel. Ideal theory of engage in historical things that they argue that and its full special and generate access to the principle neutral account and ideal account for the origin civil society were always in sexual patriarchy and settled into rights of minority ideal theories of civil society terms of extermination of indigenous people activation use to shift the register of argumentation to the orientation highly abstract to colonial statement of ideals or situation of patients the function going occupation and settler colonialism is deeply ingrained with as learning culture reflecting universal logic of non-natural ethics their philosophy gets appropriated to justify the extermination of indigenous people because it's cultural starting for a interesting control. Cycles to replace the cultural sending under their condition toward cultural and active cultural position as facing cultural part of the individual and mode. The universal less universal part of learning them to cultural and people bring the Middle East mode. The Asian freedom of the same relation to colonial origin, this other colonial relation is not with us rather than political economy. In the same logic, economy is universal civilization on the beach, giving up normally celebrity domain. The European way Western powers and culture and urban attacks. They'll actually skip the Dali card for now. And international laws, origins, and racial races refuse to acknowledge native sovereignty, training authorities predicated on the non-existence of indigenous government, and then seeks to reconcile native and difference to genocide only. 18 colonialization and the partial recognition of sovereignty, enabling local people to ensure treaties that they can have several language, people organized national and inherently just based on racial regions, imagine native sovereignty treaties, regulations, and regal sovereignty, destruction of communities, or harmony, treaties, and honorable with market, how much of it is that, and then remain same for sovereignty, non-sovereignty, indigenous people, not against your sign, international states of development, international social conditions, the illustration of these are future positive design to look, covering the settler, colonial equivocation, and moves to innocence, fails to trust settler colonialism, which is specifically like also calls indigenous people savages, which independently mess up and link because they're still portrayed as the other end, as per Kant and Yale. Colonial equivocation, homogenizing version Russian soldiers, the Congress, the British colonies, the German, the other ones, all searching into real estate culture. It's going to be happy to do the tribes, the settlers, one of the political and creative, not to the whole, the publications, you can even listen to the person, and doing the purpose and the big talent, something cultural thing about the technology, standing, voting, meeting, settlers, and the alternative is a call for play, is basic education, is regards to theorizing, president, justice, and knowledge, with settler homes and faces, and this is the ground of strategy, normative theories, and there's unconditional, does not feel anything, so only to the one I see service, and alternative meta ethic that should be used to draw a practical for so influential material, while decolonization of the police force and conditional, secret 14, which is because given the conception of the place of non-dominant industries of places of the personal knowledge, all knowledge, not places, place, the person knowledge, or relatives, and domination, there's a local very one relationship to the world, I think there's just over beyond the southern speculative roots of justice, the knowledge, which is like culture today, they can also have denominational, the epistemic, solar, critical, and terrorism, place today, the interrogating for friends, self-intrigued, positionality, living against, they complex in the physical relationship, the denomination, natural and politics of the self-check, and also into place, the normative habits, best and impacting, and no place of education, and just personality, where protected, solar traditions, that are reducing logic, denomination, centering, and digital knowledge, every question of your epistemology is your role as a judge, 14, solar tradition, place, our theology, ethics, ideology, knowledge, and the river, so much as the word, all ought to be interpreted, traditional, denomination, ongoing, historical, culture, solar tradition, place, and normalizing practice of limitations, nutrition, for hierarchized world, is that manifests cultural, some individual actions, imitation, very traditions, systemic transition, goes against this person, as far as every person is uncomfortable, and assumptions begin to catalyze as critical consciousness. I forgot to put a card in the box. One sec, let me open it. The state of nature is not valid, say, press, dominant interest, and primitive the charge, active alternative stringer. Your top part of the patient and consider the political project rather than living reading for the returning president, each other reserve, fixed, captive, the Neil Roger, and the Lord Daniel Nation, fixed, equipment, one of the rights on the state, we choose to send them over, and peer rights on it is organization, no available density, the short on the solution, and I'm convinced the liberals, represents liberals, and all results in positive social transformation, and economically impressing the Hoffman comes Germany, and the margins, and only from I say, even mental thing of his managing alternatives, and topics of informative, and Australian narratives, and any process of people. Non-universal, non-hierarchical, non-coercive relations, some mutual items there. The whole commitment neck exists on the interpretation, the opposite object to virtues, the negative, it contests our ability, the consequences of their personality, the object, and also make sure let that independent random ideal world that the theory events or other how to open theories in the real world versus reality matters. Theories are not deployed in a vacuum in the way they should be deployed, should be the focus, anything else. We can abstract away from colonialism, avoid uncomfortability that comes to grappling with the balance of settlers and all. Live and the examples they give in Costa, indigenous peoples forcing settlers up, the land of balance who would be back to being active coercion, natives stealing to feed their family because stealing is non-universal, so natives refusing to pay taxes, otherwise called the USFG because the fact that they get funding animal from the state would make them feel free later. Second subject for motion only my interpretation, some debaters examine the ethical implications that actually on direct consequences that always you will become advocates of the advocates become to the framework or back is even from likely be using it that's a prerequisite because even if you're smarter at philosophy in the back end doesn't matter if you use it in a helpful way. Do not evaluate the plan through the plan text versus if we away from support of feelings perfect criticism not achievable and a level playing field only against the is fair enough to generate clash. Second is links for predictable literally and links to framework is the premise and over half the outlier to debate. Three stands focus on fair emphasis on 5 seconds feeling more arbitrary than focusing on refs or assumptions of the entire affirmative on the under you get one or three of no preset paradigm issues key to reciprocity section list for stealing candy from it. It is that like stealing candy store go to the framework proper tuple framing issues versus every morally wrong global the one he sees infinite length that she shouldn't be allowed to cut out or refuse build a whole day accountable for racist choices that make it the one I see purchasing so only about racist on letters or she again this is plan from settler fluidity second each auto reject any framework or they try to come to impact that don't matter nine things like genocide racism matter rate debate these are to be encouraged development of racist activities that always accessibility maintaining society regs to the other and skip the B point and I'm making this clear at the top. I'm not going to read judicial economics and their usual offense or two rollabouts and I can't indicate rollabout if we win Connor's wrong that means you should evaluate the case for workers explicitly not utilitarian is about the ass research project not the consequences behind the one no one ARA 6 always bullshit skip the 4 point go to the framework proper ethics should not begin after from a starting program from what we know is wrong the first step beginning after since traditional disability calculators and successful native search have their identity second the operating knowledge can not exist the two people disagree with the operator comes to divulge empirical answers all in three all of the ideal about arguments into this natural policy is wrong and indigenous people are able to drive the balance like sovereignty community without reference to it as well as the operator western policy should obviously never system was right independent of hearing their confirm their argument towards an exclusionary understanding of a legitimate civil legitimate uncertainty is wrong no we have no way you're sitting there and think there because we could be dreaming about that too good a conceit of authority just because we use reason to make decisions and make intentions good just like oxygen is into extend need to breathe action theory is wrong first that we can stop finding a reasonable one resource infinite regress and go to universalizability is strong first that universal ethics or possible development and ethics are formed by social location or is right person I have an obligation not to steal what it doesn't mean that someone's stealing to feed their families about this fruit but this fruit's only taken a stealing or protection you should your role by associated with servicing that provides a contract in universalized skip 3 point normativity strong species of protection everyone can choose not follow no agency framework good consequences though they don't fail versus the merely company the last policy makers to responsibility for racist effects of their action for example settler claiming their time was about the indigenous population they settled second is that it's empirically not obviously the one I see rely as a prediction because they do things like make their arguments that yes it can get action use prediction forcing consequences no infinite consequences so important you can round down or treat deduction is regularly continuing and predict things reasonable order answer consequences feel like aggregation doesn't feel because we can round on TTS reject and debating on pure and correct framework just is more fair it makes no sense that was framework arguments at the top on far group the far and the other card versus far as long native and been excluded from these notions of reason that are subject as an ideal world where settlers affect the native technique which proves their disconnect from reality seconds they have a backwards equal during inclusionism and social justice the end goal to settle the project settlers want non-contributing natives in the fold universal reason to all means those people are culturally native.
Okay. Good for cross.
Oh yeah, do you want me to? I'll send the card that I read.
Oh yeah, I do need that. All right. I'll start that. I can start cross, but I'll start prep after I get that card. All right,
Yeah.
good.
Mm-hmm.
Safi alternative.
It's unconditional. That was in 1 and 2.
Oh yeah, my bad. No, it can't be a floating pick.
Mm-mm.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about the Tuck and Yang evidence. How is Karana a colonial equivocation? Equivocation. Sorry, is context of the Tuck and Yang card is about the settled native slave triad and homogenizing all oppression as colonization. How does Karana do that?
Yeah, sure. I think that this is a great example of the link argument because in the app, this card sort of talks about like colonialist powers and savages, etc., but never once says the word settler colonialism or sort of relates the violence that indigenous people uniquely face, sort of just talks vaguely about like colonized populations. That is exactly what our Tuck and Yang card is criticizing. So it's sort of talking about why it's like really messed up to sort of call groups colonized without sort of examining the structure of settler colonialism that sort of predates and sort of is able to explain the relationships between those people and just sort of proves that your explanation is
okay, cool. The Scott evidence, why do we link?
The Scott evidence, yeah, sure. So your offense is sort of on why international law is good. Argument is that why international law is bad. Like even if you say that you don't like
when has the 1AC defended international law is good?
Yeah, I'm just about to get there. Sure. Okay, the fact that you use international law as sort of a basis for your ethics, that sort of means that there is a link.
Where do we use international?
Are you gonna let me? Okay.
No, I understand your question.
Like,
I want to ask a follow-up question. Where's the 1AC presenting international law as a starting point or based in our ethical framework?
Yeah, sure. So you sort of say international law is like a good standard and a promise that sort of should.
When?
The argument is that is messed up because international law is a terrible.
Listen.
Yeah.
Okay, when have we ever said international law is good? Like, tell me anywhere in the 1AC.
You say, okay, under your offense section, you say that you sort of use international law as a sort of the framing for your offense because you say that like breaking sort of promises that were made in ILAW are bad. We're critiquing that notion because we say that we should not use ILAW as sort of a basis for anything, including your framework.
Okay, let's talk about the Nichols evidence. The Nichols evidence is, can you explain like the warrant why ideal theory is bad?
Yeah, sure. So this argument has a couple warrants. First is that it sort of talks about why Kant sort of presumes a view from nowhere. Like when you sort of begin with like ethics a priori, it means that you aren't able to take into account like lived realities of things like native people, which papers over the balance they go over because Kant will sort of never be able to recognize like the structural injustices and sort of the generational violence that these populations have faced. Next, the card sort of talks about why next the card sort of talks about like why civil society itself was sort of premised on the extermination of indigenous people, which sort of means that your theories about like property rights like not something that indigenous people participated in, and your framework just like doesn't really make any sense. We also
all right, I will open up this card and then I'll start prep.
Okay.
All right, it's just opening. I'll copy and paste it.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, prep, start.
Okay.
143 used. Let me just sign this up.
What's the order gonna be?
Case, starting framework, the offense, the underview. Underview, I'll just do the whole entire framework interpretation debate there. So I'll also answer the critiques, framework interpretation, and the critique proper. All right, let me just send this.
Sorry, can you give the order one more time?
Yeah, basically case top down, but on the underview page, I'll also be answering the 1 and 2 framework interpretation. And then the critique.
Can you also send analytics?
I mean, there's like, okay. I have to find this.
Are you sending another doc or should I download the doc that you sent?
I'll send another doc for
Okay.
the analytics.
Okay.
And then I will need the order one more time.
Yeah, no problem. All right, should be sent. AF, top down, underview, answering the critique framework interpretation, the critique proper.
By top down, do you mean framework then advantage?
Yeah, framework then the contention level off.
Sorry, I was just calling it.
Yeah,
advantage.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
a policy. Yeah, it's
So framework, the contention, the underview, you said?
Mhm.
Yes, and then the critique?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm opening
Okay.
up. 2 seconds.
Also for the analytics, when I say like 1 and C1 and C2, even though there's like 18 million analytics read by the 1 and C, it's about like the specific analytics they read on that specific argument. It's like the first analytic on universal maxims or something like that. If that helps y'all with flowing.
I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm going to flow straight down.
All right, that matters. Yeah. All right.
I need one more second. I'm opening the doc.
All right, cool.
Okay, I'm good.
All right, cool. Jack and Gray. All right, cool. Fantastic. Am I recording? All right. The series consistency with the categorical comparative extent binding this is a meta ethic of consumerism, so you ought to prefer since you only got active theories binding. What agency is unescapable because as for our reason requires reason, the response is wrong. A point, we don't claim reason is intrinsic good, but that means we're all agents and that is a good. To B point, misunderstands practical reason. The A when he sees this is only binding and unescapable authority. Thus, we must universal maxims if all agents are equal, infringe you one other freedom to justify someone's impeding on your freedom. The 1 and C, 1 on universal maxims is ought fallacy. Just because it is doesn't mean it ought to be. Second, it uses consequential to justify the stealing would be good, but obviously we take a sense that stealing would be the 1 and C2 argument misunderstands maxims. We do not care about specific spaces and times. It's about general principles. 1 and C theory evidence it's incorrect. We'll extend the far evidence through recognizing everyone's reason under conscience ethics. We know that everyone has agency as real universality principles apply to them, and we must treat all others as agents that equally prevents oppression, not a reason inclusion, because it clearly what our framework delineates. Answering the far and Quran indicts 1 and C1 depends on empirics, but obviously the past and use our framework. We can see that we're an ideal world, but that's good. 1 and C2 lacks on why inclusion into reason causes less people. Also, these analytics don't only apply to far and not Quran. When I extend it on the permutation, answering the top level framing issues 1 and C1, they have to win it settled colonials, and not just problematic group 1 and C2 not doing 2 and 3 not doing that. 1 and C4 what constitutes the spike. It was the most substantive 1AC possible at answering the starting point. The argument is 1AC1 caused by foreign reason. It's accessible to natives. 2, operator claims cannot be disagreed upon because of universal truth. 3, they haven't made any ideal bad theory arguments on the case based. Extend the office list in order to claim private or property. There is the omni-level rule, which is like a government, that private appropriation violates that, and thus it possesses one's wills above another. Extend the go to the underview, extend the interpretation that evaluate the affirmative through a plain text. The next should get offense from the advocacy of the fact is only reliable stasis point for argumentation. Anything excels limits these infinite things as negative order. Offense from the line, but you say fairness is unachievable, but it's a question of right line fairness. We need to be able to engage with around ability to argue to clash about what sort of skills matter, which means fairness is internally. You say links are predictable. No, it's a question of the model it generates. There's infinite things like each in the middle school world. It's a question of the norm you justify. You say 6 hand contest is more arbitrary, but it's the context of the affirmative. The content of the affirmative justified through the plain text, which means it's 6 minutes and not arbitrary literature, and it's sort of 5 months of the topic. All previous not arbitrary objective research. No, we got to weigh representations of ideal theory. If it's good, then every argument on the 1 year K page applies. Reality matters. We'll just when deploying the 1AC is a good metric. Subject formation, the plain text allows to advocate for specific quality actions and learn about the ethical implications at this as well. The critique. Top level epistemology trying to reframe debating the links that all proves that the African settler native scholarship two ways is normally justifies or proves stable ethics that consistent with the critique is not verifiable relies on small instances. The failure to recognize contention to a structural the world of factors all data by foreclosing discussion of other forms of oppression over determined essential structural Barker 17 constraints foreclosing until the black indigenous history to rather understand BL don't say her name DWL code generates colonial society which describes the overdetermined by historical effects structural zone generates a historical apolitical problem set of colonial is just an unstable context society. This is how the consistent media this is not futile black indigenous identities are intersectional meaning their analysis to be careful grouping all communities and settlers and pitting them as struggles as against generally decolonization will happen to remove just air condition of oppression and liberations bound together. We can affirm what's other concerns to move our circles forward. The black community of Flint and Lakota, Sandy Rock, Audits, or water links them together. Skid the Macoon card, the line below the links, the Nichols and Higgins, the cards group, and one people acting unethically and past. It doesn't mean striving for ideal of equality. Bad as neighbors are agents of respect in our favor. 2 links are to unspecific application of freedom. Far in the category of about when specificity cards only description of the ideal world, but they have to apply const political theory in the model. Theory of distraction is good. The only way to universally condemn instances of violence or framework religious colonialism, bad on scales, justifies racism, sexism, and other solutions spread. One impact the framework measures ethics to rule it constantly changes with daily evidence. Didn't read the Scott evidence cost 6 was clear. We don't take a stance on international law. The plain text says we can agree to any enforcement by you, so you have the opportunity for us not to defend it. Don't defend the implementation. You should have asked a cross. There's no link to Tucking Yang evidence. Corona put savages into quotes because he quoting them and then refuting the European logic. Tucking Yang is a contextual homogenized oppression, not what Corona is about. Specifically reference European colonization on native to state of nation card. The card is in the context of the state right now, not ideals on the rule. The state of nature literally justifies violence against natives. Alternative permutation to both colonialism and unambiguous violation of freedom. Large accumulation of stolen territories that in a form of aggressive war, which forecloses indigenous people's right to self-governance. So when you see Corona, which means that you do not get new responses. I'll answer the case answers, but those were just non-specific and only answered for the 2's permutation to the act that will sabotage the method of universal for radical potential, i.e. French Revolution, using idealistic rupture of political opposition to prove their non-comparable theory. If it's a true institution replicate violence overwhelms all and doesn't do anything about structural scope of solvency flows out because good policy can benefit and just should be rejection and permutation to both total rejection universal ethics is worse for settler colonizing to collapse egos and the settlers do what they want with no risk of ethical theory stopping. The app would say stealing land is immoral, which means we can achieve the alternative, but you see app as philosophical justifications, i.e. non-locate using arguments for intrinsic freedom during the civil rights movement. Also don't make sure that 2NR has intrinsic and specific nuance application on a generic 2NR overview.
Yeah, okay, I have like 450.
54.
Yeah, 54. Any independent reasons to reject the team?
Nope.
Okay. It'll be the framework page. Then it'll be the critique page, and then it will be the app page. It'll just be like the framework page on the app. Is everyone good?
Can I get that one more time?
Yeah. So it'll be like the underview page or like where the K framework debate is happening. And then it will be the K page proper, and then it will be the affirmative page or just like the app page.
3 quick questions. Are there new cards? Is there an overview? Does it require a new sheet?
There is not, I don't think so. I think most of the things are on the line that one. So it's probably okay.
And no new cards.
No.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay. Are all of the judges good? Other judges, Con, you good? Okay. Do not end my career to a 1 yard to said that settler colonialism was not verifiable. Go to the framework debate proper top levels that our interpretation is that the 1AC is an objective research. This means the negative can either contest the desirability of that research or the research requires the consequence of the epistemology of that object of level. First is that realities matter. You can't just look at how a theory is theoretically developed in a vacuum. That doesn't make any sense. You should hold them accountable for the way their theory is utilized and exported. We aren't speaking in a vacuum. When we endorse theories, we increase their prevalence and acceptance, which means we're ethically responsible for how that theory gets weaponized. The 1Rs claim that they can detach their theory from the political context in which it is leveraged is the Lake argument, because our argument is that we're inextricably embedded in the process of settler colonialism, allowing them to abstract away to defending only an ideal world allows the denial of the history of colonialism and avoids the uncomfortability that comes with the balance of settlerism. The second argument is subject formation. The only sort of intrinsic, terminal impact of being able to clash and debate about things is being able to be more ethical. It doesn't matter if we clash about things like the economic, the econ or imperialism, good or bad, if those debates are unproductive and lead to bad forms of subjectivity, that always because every single debate has some sort of clash and advocacy. But if the model is through their framework is far worse because they're more likely to be used unethically on the line proper top levels, that even if we lose the framework debate, you should be negative because winning a risk of the link versus that the framework is wrong, but a framework is wrong, which means that you can just negate on presumption, but on the line proper. It's not a question of a bright line. There is a marginally more, there's only marginally more fairness in their model since before he was able to defend your app again. And so it's a critique that indicted like your entire framework page is definitely enough. It is not a question of the norm. First is obviously we cannot nitpick specific things under our model because that wouldn't seem to sort of be indicting the entire app as an objective research, a specific part of it. And second, that's silly word picks, etc. can easily be back by just making vague arguments or losing just making vague arguments, etc. But we should obviously lose if the entire app framework is racist on the plan text vacuum not being arbitrary. Yes, it is definitely more arbitrary because even if the plan text, and so your arguments on 1 yard about how sort of the plan text is justified about everything else in the app means that we should be able to indict everything else in the app. And yes, you do, and you know you do not get to write your representation of the ideal theory. That was a step about this argument. Super flipping no narrow trees. Just hold the line because they were super rushed on this, and all our words from the 1NC were conceded. Go to the K page proper. Okay, yeah. The app definitely cannot center similar colonialism. That will be on the link explanation. Con does not outweigh though. First is that saying that we have to justify why oppression is wrong is a link you can convince people by looking at material suffering, not a convoluted 1 + 1 = 2. Oops, we also care about natives 2 syllogism. Otherwise, we spend all day trying to resolve the trolley or organ donor dilemmas instead of maturely organized to decolonize, which you already know is good because we need to go through every single other ethical possibility first. Second is that indigenous people do have normative and ethical values through processes that are not a priori, not based in Western philosophies. Poverty and connection to land are through the a priori system, through experiences in the world around them. An alternative is an alternative way of approaching ethics by looking at the lived experiences as a proof. They can do that because of their ethical system value being landing sovereignty, and it is racist to say that as not legitimate, which also answers their arguments later about how our network justifies racism because it obviously does not on the ideal theory. But we'll extend that here. Ideal theory presumes a view from nowhere. This paper is with a structural and inequalities that assumes that everyone starts from the same viewpoint, but in reality can't reconcile the differences in subject positions. For example, their framework will condemn here are the 3 conceded examples from the 1NC learn to flow. First is that indigenous people sourcing settlers off the land with bonds because it would be an act of coercion. Second is native stealing to feed their family because stealing is not universalizable. 3 is that native is refusing to pay taxes otherwise fall the law because the fact in funding and welfare would make them freeloaders. Insofar as they've conceded all of these reasons why universal ethics are wrong because the framework is unable to also rectify independent instances of different groups. Shouldn't let them grant that their ideal theory does respect natives, because we have specific examples in the instances of the framework song. They do not get new 2AR responses because they were conceded from the one they conceded from the one at Young, the Lamella and the Nichols first people acting unethically in the past reviews are relevant because they are certainly not respected in the law, which sort of means that if so far as your theory is appropriated in the real world, that was stepped down on the framework page is not our argument is not unspecific. We have explicit examples from the one and C, which is sort of stuff that we extended here. And extraction is a terrible, the extraction is sort of a terrible model because it means that it papers of the lived realities and your theory is the view from nowhere, which is sort of the link argument. We're not going for the IR link or the other links, but we will go for the state of nature link. This also, we're going for the state of nature there. And then sort of the ways in which the state of nature and Kant views property rights is just wrong. This is just wrong. This card sort of proves about how the property rights will never be expected, never be respected under the model, because native governments do not have property rights in the same way that Kant is talking about. Yes, they do things on claims to sovereignty, but it is not quote unquote property rights, means that they can't do, which means that they can't give a 2R while like Kant justifies decolonization because it hinders, etc. That makes no sense. The state of nature is not bad. It's sort of just a racist trope, which makes no sense. Their answer to this was horrible because I'm saying the state of nature is bad for natives. It's just describing the rule natives are in prior to appropriation, because their societies can't exist without having Western forms of property rights, which is the link argument. We're not going for the Tuck and Yang arguments. We don't need to go for that either. On the permutation arguments group, the parents first is that all links already says the permutations so far as when all over civil link is GG. Second is that this is a move to innocence and assimilation. This argument was mishandled on the case page and also answers the far card trying to assimilate sort of natives to make some sort of natives into your project is obviously terrible, because insofar as one single settle is the same taxing settlers sort of use when trying to integrate natives into society, because it legitimizes their existence on land insofar as there's less cultural ties and nativity, which is the same sort of logic of boarding schools, threes, and all of our framework research projects sort of approve the mutual exclusivity and force. There's no terms in a framework versus the K-debate. You choose every part of the framework on them, which proves that I have it. That has a massive flaw. Also, go back up to the top there. A valuable blacker card sort of doesn't prove that settler colonialism is wrong, because there can be other contingent things that settler colonialism doesn't disagree with. They just conceded that settler colonialism itself is structured. Go to the case page. Go to the case page. The systems of rationality always bias against natives, so they are seen as irrational savages. In short, was the independent critique of rationality on the case page, which sort of proves that the framework does not presume natives are rational. As far evidence also is our assimilation argument. They conceded, which these massively mishandled in the one hour, because they sort of just said that like people can be included, but that is our argument that is bad and messed up as per our structuralism and link arguments.
All right, just let me see how much I have. 317. Let me just set that. All right. The like just like framework, then the offense, the um underview, like the framework debate, and then the critique proper.
I'm good.
All right, cool. I should check something. I think my recording stopped. All right. Cool. No theory of power extending the true norm means we have the only ethical conception of how the world works. They send the standards consistent with the category paradigm because it's a question only agency is unescapable to ask the reason why requires the reason. That must mean the universal maximus if all agents are equal infringing one's freedom just why someone's impeding on your freedom. Extend the far evidence that was conceded through recognizing everyone's reason or to conduct ethically know that everyone has agency. As a result, universal principles apply to everyone with treat all others as agents and equally prevents oppression, not a ruse of inclusion, because it's clearly what our framework outlines. Well, answers for the index extended tuner. You say systems of rationality. It's a new argument in the tuner. I conceded the extension far that everyone is seen as agents and everybody is accessible to reason, which means they're not seen as irrational. Is a critique of sort of misapplications of Kantianism, but not our version of the framework. You say inclusion is bad. We answer this in the one area. The argument is that there's no war on why that's bad until the two are obviously combining strategies is a good thing. It results in a positive model that resolve oppression for subtle goings in the framework debate. The framework debate, I'll concede that you should evaluate through the plan of objective research, but you concede the one-year response that if we get into object research, we just win the object research of ideal theory or representations of continuity is good. If when it's good, then every argument the critique applies because it's a question of the research that we've done. You say it was superability, even if it's superability, that's just not a response. It was not a response. You say when you risk the link means the framework is wrong, not true. You haven't normally denied our framework argument. Secondly, all the reality matters. You can see the one is a deployable metric if we win a permutation because it resolves often granted into two on subject formation. You can see that the plan text is good for advocacy because it allows us for specific policy action to learn about the ethical implications of those roles, which means residual defense because their framework interpretation means it's not an instant ballot. Jack, I know again in doubles you just voted on, so the framework interpretation takes out the critique, takes out the one see normal theory. Don't do that work for them if it wasn't extended into the tuner. Obviously, when the ethical conceptual world denies their sort of theory of power extended the critique. Extend the Barker evidence, the failure to recognize the contingent state of the world factor, solidarity, but focusing discussion of other forms of oppression of over determined centralized structuralism. One is a question of no extension of theory of power in the tuner means or how the world operates means if I win a risk of said that subtle colonialism is wrong, then obviously all the ranks are wrong because I have a question if they misunderstand how the world works or why their theory of the world is wrong, then there's no impact in sort of subtle colonialism. You've conceded that your conceptual arguments of structuralism or how the world operates in a binary logic is a bad thing. It doesn't allow for intersectional struggles and communal struggles and tactics to understand how the world works, i.e. sort of black and indigenous communally structurally and civil rights movements, i.e. the structuralism is overdetermined as historic and apolitical, which is bad in a sort of a form and a dissent to there aren't here extend the permutation going for the Quran permutation. Colonialism is actually permutation to the after the alternative sabotage use methods of universalism for radical potential, i.e. French Revolution using idealistic to rupture political opposition which proves they're not incompatible. You say links are dissets. If no, it proves that we can work through a residual link, which is minuscule. You say move to and it's no work is a necessary strategy which outweighs the specificity of permutation, i.e. It's not the question of illogical boarding schools, it's a question of using the freedom to break out of boarding schools. You say no frameworks with okay debate. You have it one, a framework is normatively wrong. Also conceded to decide on the alternative. If institutions replicate violence, it overwhelms all and doesn't do anything about the structure, i.e. if structuralism is wrong, then the alternative could not resolve the link scope of solvency flows advocates a good policy that can prevent individual folks. We rejected a conceded permutation. Winning or how the ethical theory of the world works means that the aft is a necessary prerequisite to engaging in decolonization. Even if the links are dissents, they conceded their theory of structuralism is wrong. Great debate.
Yay, debate.
Okay, the decision is in.
Okay, I'm here.
Give me just 2 seconds. Actually, give me like 4 seconds. Sorry, I just have to go through it.
Are either of y'all oh, Alyssa's a senior. Before we give the decision, or actually it doesn't matter. We'll do it after. The decision is a 3-0 for the negative from Sequoia. I voted neg. I think winning your ethical theory.
I'm so sorry. Do you mind if I go first? Because I have class in like 15 minutes.
Go for it.
I'm really sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good.
And just considering it was a 3-0, I figure it doesn't really matter. Okay, good debate. This was obviously not my forte whatsoever, but I really enjoyed it. And I think if I was going to be in LD for more time, I think I'd be okay for an affirmative strategy like this. That's heavy on the justifications and light on the tricks/theory. So good stuff. I enjoyed this debate. And I also thought it was very close, which is something that I want to say from the outset. I end up voting negative that the 1EC's ethical framework causes bad subject formation and naturalizes settler colonialism, which is violent. I think this debate primarily comes down to if the negs link to the AFS theory outweighs the possibility for the AFS theory to be retooled by a permutation. There's a strong link argument from the neg about how universalizable ethics paper over lived experiences of oppression. There are 2 examples that I think the 2AR is not really grappled with that weigh heavily in my mind. The first and biggest one is about how indigenous people forcing settlers off the land would be coercion and thus violate the AF framework. The second, and still important, is that a poor Black person stealing food for their family would also violate the categorical imperative. I think that these things prove that there are instances of oppression that the affirmatives framework would necessitate when it gets actualized in the real world. From the AF as an answer to this argument, I'm persuaded by the arguments that Native people can be included into the frame of who can reason, and I don't think the negative has really, handled this argument particularly well, but I don't think that that resolves the external impacts to this link argument about how the affirmatives framework would necessitate those forms of violence. To round this out, I'm persuaded by both the reality matters and subject formation framing arguments from the neg, so I think if the links outweigh the link turns, I should vote negative. For the AF, I think the largest pieces of offense from the AF I have in this debate are 3 things. A, only our theory universalizable, and that's good. B, structuralism DA to the next theory of power. And C, sabotage perm. I'll go through each. First, only our theory universalizable. I think that the negs link argument is problematizing this, and they have a subject formation argument that problematizes the agents that result from the affirmatives theory. In addition, I think just the empirical indigenous people lived ethically prior to colonization argument from the neg is not really answered by the AF, and it means I'm skeptical that the AF's theory is the only moral theory available. I think we would have needed to do more to impact turn the state of nature link argument in the 1AR and the 2AR in order to make this a completely viable 2AR option, in my mind. Structuralism DA. I agree with the 2AR that this dissat is mishandled, but at the same time, I'm kind of unsure what you want me to do with it. I don't think that the card or your argument in the 1AR is saying settler colonialism and racism don't exist. I think it just says that we can struggle in the material world against those forms of structural oppression. This is somewhat confusing to me in a debate where the AF is very much leading into ideal theory good and where the negative has a specific link to the affirmative. This leads me to the last thing, the sabotage perm. This is where I think I'm closest to voting AF because the perm debate is like really messy on both sides. However, I think that to win this, it would require some explanation from the AF on how the AF's theory gets retooled to resolve settler colonialism. I hear you about the French Rev. Good argument. Unsure why it resolves colonialism. Conversely, the next should point out that France post-revolution was a colonial power, ? Last thing, I think winning the 2AR in this debate, I think the winning 2AR in this debate would point out that the 2NR did not extend their alternative, so they can't solve any of their link arguments, and then using that as a broader framing device to make me skeptical that voting neg would solve anything, given that they wouldn't have a better mode of subject formation despite what they've claimed. Miscellaneous comments. AF, I think we need more offense against the K in this debate, namely on the alt. They read a card from Decol is not a metaphor, and then for their colonial equivocation link, and then said education solves ... I think you could get a DA from that. Also, I think you can make a pathologization DA to the way that they framed their links in cross-ex. They said that the 1EC's theory of morality and rationality is inaccessible to Native people. That language is saying that Native people are incapable of reason. Obviously, the next argument is actually that the frame of practical reason at a universal subject is violent, but the way that the cross-ex explains the link is about a question of access. So instead of just saying natives can access reason, which solves, which is a defensive argument. We can make this offense by attaching a disad that says you have pathologized natives and said that they can't reason, which is messed up. Last big thing for the AF, their indictment of your Corona card is wrong. Your card says that Europeans were savages, according to Kant, not indigenous people. I think that this argument is empirically incorrect, but you have a card that says it, and they don't have a card that says it doesn't. So you should just extend this argument and make it a net benefit to the perp. For the neg, the ILAW link, I think that we need to be framing this more as the 1AC has said that breaking the promise of ILAW is bad, which papers over the originary promise between settlers and native people to co-steward the land, which is being broken continuously by practices of genocide, so that this becomes both a problem for their theory and proves irreconcilability because you elevate white promises over promises made to indigenous people. Instead of just being like, you said ILAW is good, because truly they did not. They just said that breaking the promise of ILAW is good. Breaking the promise of ILAW is bad, which actually I think is worse for them, but we need to make the link more contextual to what they said. The state of nature stuff, I think we should make this more of a link argument instead of just saying state of nature not violent. Kant and Hobbes based their theory of the state of nature literally off of examining African indigenous societies and then saying, look at these uncivilized people, and then look at us enlightened white people in comparison, and then saying this is the justification for why we need our theory of morality to govern those who can't be trusted to govern themselves. We were like kind of getting there in the 2NR, but I think it was mostly defense with a little bit of offense, and I think that should be flipped. Okay, I'm done. Sorry for the rant. I'm going to go, but if anyone has questions, feel free to email them to me. This was a really fantastic debate, and I appreciated you all having me in the back.
Okay, I can go now. I basically had the exact same RFD. I voted neg. I think the neg is winning, that even if the AF framework is true, that's still a bad research model, which means I should negate, even if they don't have this sort of alternative explanation of how the world works that the 2AR is explaining. They're still winning that the forwarding of your framework is something that's problematic and you should lose because of it. I think that you should lose because if there's a risk of a link, it's punishment as a way to hold you accountable for exporting a racist theory, and it creates better advocates outside of debate, which outweighs. I think the coercion link is just severely mishandled. It was dropped that indigenous people hold closer values like ties to land and tradition that your framework cannot explain, and papering over them is something that's bad and exclusionary. The ideal theory link is just like not really answered. Because a view from nowhere can't explain violence of certain groups by others and assumes everyone has an equal playing field. It would also condemn things like indigenous people taking back land or stealing something, which is bad. It means the link outweighs any sort of net benefit to the perm. I think the net benefit to the permutation is this like intersectional struggles disad. I also agree with the previous judge. I don't know what to do with this. I just like, it's really just not fleshed out that much. It's just kind of extended and not really weighed against these sort of link explanations that the 2NR is giving me. So I really don't know what to do with this when it comes to the permutation. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I don't have a whole ton to add, but I guess I can give like a little bit of a different perspective on it. I think the big terminal thing, I think, is the AF goes for way too much in the 2AR. The 2AR is just like stuffed full of arguments and like not enough interaction is done. So the 2AR basically says there's no theory of power in the 2NR, but I think really what that is just misunderstanding the way that this role of the ballot argument is being leveraged from the theory framework argument, because they're basically explicitly making arguments, especially at the top of the flow, about how reality is non-ideal and how we have to analyze theories and their specificity through discourse. And while every debate has clashed, they don't all have the possibility of like ethical subject formation, which is really the impact that we want out of debate. So I think like embedded in this like generic interpretation about how you need to have an object of scholarship as the focus of the debate is more specific arguments about things like basically like discourse shapes reality, representations, etc. So I just don't think you answer those, which means I do think there's at least like some theory of power, though I'm like sympathetic to the fact that the 2NR is like not really doing a whole lot on the alternative. The specific claims here are all tailored to critiquing ideal theory, which means if the neg wins the AF as an object of research, most of the 2AR goes away. And it also means like the 2AR case framework extensions just seem like they're on a lower level than these like kind of roll of the ballot arguments. Second is the perm on the K page is through the ink of all the examples why Kant would reject the alt. There's also, yeah, I agree with the first RFD that a big thing for me is at the top of the page is this idea that like there are material understandings of violence, which are salient alternative epistemologies to the Western way of thinking about ethics as being syllogistically justified. So there's no need to use the sort of logic of the AF. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, this 2AR needs to probably collapse to like one or two things instead of like three or four things, and I think maybe would have been winnable. But yeah, great debate. I thought this was really fun to judge.
I just have a couple questions. So for the 2R, do you think I should have gone for like my framework interp and then just answer the links line by line, and then that would have been like a good 2R, or just answer the links on a line by line and just go for permutations? Like, do you think like going for the framework interp is like a viable strategy?
It's hard to say. I mean, the debate was quite messy. I think I'm sort of of the thought that like the perm might just be dead in the water, and you might just want to concede the like neg roll of the ballot and try to go for like offense under the K. Like maybe, for example, you want to sit harder on this turn you're going for, like the case turn, about like structuralism being overdetermined. And I think maybe that in conjunction with just more like, I think like, for example, this 2AR could have been more on like what the 2NR didn't say than what you did say, right? Like I think the 2AR could have been more on like, listen, the 2NR is missing the alternative. They're missing an explicit positive roll of the ballot that isn't just discourse. And here's the consequences of missing these two things in the context of the argument I'm going for. And then I think you'd be in a way better position because you'd have more implications. Because I just think that the problem in the 2AR is not like it's like you're going for too much, but also like you're just not pointing out the problems of the 2NR. If that makes sense. So I think like going for the case
Yeah, that
turn
makes sense.
and stuff like that would make sense.
Okay. If Jack doesn't have anything to add, then I'm good.
The only thing would be just like I was not hoping for a 2AR on this framework interp. I just think that I agreed that it's just like I think it's too muddled to be going for this framework interp, especially when I think the 2NR does like a pretty substantial job sort of like winning that evaluate as a research model. I think that the 2AR should have been on this like link turn.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.